Good evening. Welcome. This is a new world we're venturing into. Live streams. Did you ever think your life would get this place?
Not really, no. Are we actually live, or are we just the
Well, apparently it says
YouTube?
we are live, but we shall see. If anybody doesn't know what the hell we're doing here or what the plan is, my name is Chris Mullen. I talk books, Blu-rays, that kind of thing, and I'm joined here by my good friend and guest.
Yes, I'm Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and I'm not as advanced as Chris, so I just generally talk about Blu-rays.
Yeah, I don't know.
Occasionally a little bit of music, but
is advanced the thing? Yeah. Oh, that is true. Well, I have to say, I'm exhausted. I've just made my way through 2 of your top 100 films of all time.
Yes, I apologise for the length, but
the length was okay. Do you know what? I was actually going to wind you up, but I was pretty much nodding my head for a lot of the top 10 at the very least. Everything after that, kind of personal choice and filmic Germany and all the rest of it. I was like, those are solid choices.
It's favourites rather than greatest, so it's hard to do greatest, but it's hard to do favourites as well.
It doubles up as a pretty good list as it goes. So if you haven't seen that, you should check it out. But we are here to talk about Indicator Blu-rays, and I've called it kind of tentatively the first 50, but really what I mean by that is kind of the start of Indicator. And I have to admit, I didn't start at the start. I jumped in sometime afterwards. I don't know about yourself.
Yeah, again, I wasn't aware of them until I came across a couple of titles. Again, I can't remember exactly which one was first, but I think there's maybe 1 out of 3 that was kind of first. But I definitely know the title in the first 50 that made me go, hang on, I might have to investigate further. But
because I was one of those. I think, at that stage of collecting or doing it otherwise and going, well, I don't really know that film.
Yeah.
I haven't really heard of that. And it was only when there was an Italian person on eBay selling the Sinbad and the Harryhausen box sets all in one lump sum together for a pretty reasonable price before they even went out of stock or otherwise. And I went, oh, but I do know those films. And I like those films. And they look very nice, those boxes. I would like to see what they feel like. I'd like to know what the touch feels like, whether the look is nice or is the feel as nice as the look, etc. So that they arrived in one bunch, and from that moment on, I think it was pretty much in.
Yeah, I mean, I think I missed the Sinbad box set as well, but I managed to get it for about 60 before it got really crazy as far as the OOP. Mm-hmm. But then, of course, last year, the year before, they kind of re-released it just as a Blu-ray only, but I missed out on the Sinbad the first time.
Yeah.
But again, I didn't have to pay an arm and a leg for it the way it ended up being like over 200 quid.
I have to say, there was many a time I looked at it and just went, why am I not selling this?
Yeah.
Like, there were some times I was going to eBay and some people had it listed for £400.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And I do regret not selling it. But I do have
the Blu-ray version. So.
Yeah. Well, I could have picked up the re-release or whatever that had.
So did I.
I think the only difference is there was, instead of like a yellow band, there was an orange band on the new version. Isn't that right? Isn't that about the only difference?
Yeah.
Between the two of them. Fine films, no matter what way you look at it or otherwise. So that was my in was very much those 3 box sets.
So for me, it's a couple of titles that I don't know whether I could mention because they're outside the top 50.
No.
But it was either Blue Collar or Charlie Varick.
Okay.
Because I was aware of those films. Mm-hmm. But if it's one inside the 50, then it's probably Lady from Shanghai, which might have been my first one. Because I remember being, Spike number 7. I remember being really excited at seeing, oh my God, Lady from Shanghai's in Blu-ray, because I think at the time it wasn't on Blu-ray as far as I'm aware. So I think that might have been one of the first as well. And again, absolutely wonderful. And when you see the extras, that's the one thing that Indicator, again, because one of the knocks on Indicator, if you like, is they don't have masterpiece after masterpiece, even though that's subjective anyway. But they do the work on the extras almost to a crazy level at times, talking to the assistant accountant on a film and stuff like that. But for me, really, the one that kind of really got my attention, the first 50 is by number 48. And it's the Night of the Demon set with 4 different cuts. Night of the Demon, Curse of the Demon. This was the one that kind of made me go, hang on, might get serious. Because again, it's a film that I've loved. Never really, I don't know whether it was available somewhere else on Blu-ray, but certainly not with this care, and the amount of extras was ridiculous, and this went out of print fairly quickly as well. So I think those kind of 4 titles were the beginning of, hang on a second, I'm going to have to investigate this.
Yeah. I'll come back to that in a second because we'll give a shout out. Our good friend Carl has posted this earlier on, so if he's still watching, Carl. How are you doing into the blue? That's just some of the finest YouTube videos there ever has been, ever will be in terms of film and recommendations. Yes. Indeed. And then good friend Sam, film blogger Sam, saying, hey guys,
evening.
Indicator what a label. You'll watch it replay. I hope I can get you through the work through the night or otherwise. See how it goes. And another good person that we can maybe talk into making a video again, David, from Premium Blu-rays.
Yes.
Settling down to watch Company of Wolves in 4K. This would have worked out great, David, because you'd have put a clip of that in your Instagram tonight, and I'd been going, I have no idea what that movie is. And that's brilliant. But great to see you stop by.
Yes.
And Warren's giving us an evening, chaps, as well. Hope everybody's keeping well.
Evening.
So, I'll touch on Night of the Demon, because I think from hearing like Sam and John, who seem to be the people that behind the genesis of the label, and who some of us get nice handwritten notes from every and again, which is something again we'll touch on. I think the Night of the Demon release is the one that they realized that they'd made it, I think, as well, because they had announced an initial print run, I think, of 5,000, and then it became very apparent that actually 5 just wasn't going to cut it.
Yeah.
And they upped it to 10. Now, I have number 1,022, which I have to say I'm surprised at, because I nearly always throw these little label things away, and as the number doesn't really matter, but there you go.
Because I'm late to the party, I've got 7,223.
You know, I think in some ways that's even more kitsch and cool, is that you kind of came upon them later. But yes, Night of the Demon was the first hard box single release, I think, wasn't it? It was the one that you kind of went, oh, this is a special film, not just a special film, but super special in some way.
Yeah, because I think at the moment I seem to be getting number 70 for all the releases, which is kind of strange.
Right, you're in a queue somewhere.
70s, so yeah.
David says we need Into the Blue back. We do indeed. Whenever you can find the time, Carl, that would be great. And then some unknown stranger.
Yes.
Nazar and Prod says, explaining that thumbnail, I don't know what there is to explain.
I think he was extremely disturbed by the image.
I don't know. I sometimes when I look at Gloria Graham, all I see is Ronin.
Yes. I want to make it clear I've never had a relationship with Nicholas Ray or his son.
That's what somebody who has done that would say. And let's just say I picked myself as Glenn Ford. So, you know, what can I say?
50-50 chance.
It was either or. I was damned if I did and damned if I didn't. So one of the other, so you talked about Charlie Varick and Blue Collar as well. I'm surprised they weren't at the top 50, because they were some of my earliest pickups as well.
Yeah, Blue Collar was in it's like 60 something. Because actually looking at them, I assumed they would be, because I'm sure they were kind of in my mind they were earlier. Yeah. But of course, they're one of those companies that don't release them like in sequence.
So they very well may have been in the first 50. Because I actually think after these, I think Blue Collar might have been one of my first after that. And actually the first full month that I ever bought wasn't until which is becoming like a monthly pilgrimage now to the Powerhouse site to kind of say, oh, this is our 4 titles this month. Was that the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, Little Murders, Effects of Gamma Rays, and something that summer.
I think I was way later for doing the monthly ones, because I think I was too busy catching up, because obviously some of them, like Bunny Lake is missing, for example, which is by number 4 or 5 or something like that.
You're close. You're 8. 8.
There you go. It was obviously by that time out of print already. And there's like some because some titles you can kind of understand. You can kind of understand that the nice special edition Night of the Demon went out of print, but there's some odd ones that you just like, why did that go out of print? You can understand Spine Number 1, Christine.
Yes, indeed.
Because I don't know whether that was Scream Factory had already done that in Blu-ray, but certainly in Britain, I think that was a debut.
It's one of those things when you look back, and I was looking back, obviously, not that I really did any preparation for this. Apologies for anybody that's watching.
Painstaking hours.
Painstaking hours. I lifted stuff up shelf. When I look at those first 10 spines, that is a pretty good set of first 10 spines in terms of quality of movie and diversification of movie and how widespread that it is. Like, I think Christine, I hadn't seen Christine before at all, and it kind of, I'd always written it off in both the book and both the film as being, it's another inanimate object or thing in a Stephen King book that comes alive. Stick it with a mangler, stick it with Cujo and stuff. It's kind of the same story, surely. And watched it and was like, oh my God, that was good.
Yeah. I think it is really underrated.
Yeah.
And again, the extras on it are fantastic.
Well, I was about to say the same thing. So I'd seen the movie by itself, and then I thought, I'll see the extras. And those interviews with our star and now director, Mr. Gordon, are still some of my favorite extras, actually, in any Indicator release, because he's a really engaging person to talk about film, and he should be on there more.
Yeah, because I think he's on a couple of releases. I can't remember the other one he's on, but certainly his commentary on A Midnight Clear is really good as well. He is a really interesting filmmaker.
Yeah, as Prod says, his first one was John Carpenter's Vampires. I mean, I'm surprised you picked up another one after it, to be honest, Peter.
Yeah, I mean, they were, I think, two of the last ones I picked up, but then the extras, it has a wonderful 2-part interview, Guardian interview with Carpenter, which is wonderful. So
It and Ghosts of Mars, they were both, I think, actually released as part of a move to break into the supermarkets. I think they were like Sainsbury's they were released in, as the story goes, and they're slightly slimmed down in terms of extras compared to a lot of the other releases, as you probably realize, kind of alluded to there. And I think that's why they were sort of like almost like a 2-pack to kind of test the waters and to see if you could break boutique Blu-ray into, supermarkets and that kind of stuff. And I think if the films had been better, sorry, John Carpenter fans of Ghost of Mars and Vampires, which I have to say they are fine. They obviously are.
They're fun, but they're not.
They're not the upper echelon of. They're not Christine even. I'll even put it like that. But and David says his was Snake Pit. Oh, he's in much better territory there.
Yeah, Snake Pit's fantastic.
Yeah, indeed.
Really impressive.
Says to check out Static as well.
There's a whole strain of women going to mental institutions and being repressed because they're thinking about sex too often in the 50s.
There's a theme through a lot of Indicator releases that sort of fall into that.
Lilith, the Warren Beatty is another one.
Something really last summer would be there are a decent amount of the crazy female lady. I mean, I have a couple sitting in front of me as well.
Diary of a Mad Housewife later on.
Yes, indeed.
So even though sometimes, again, critics might say they're a bit of a hodgepodge as far as what they release, and there is actually certain themes that run through their catalogue, and you could argue the first 20 it is perhaps a feeling out process, maybe, but I think it's also a really nice indication of where it would actually go and where it's continued to go.
You have this phrase, and I think probably we have this phrase of saying this is an indicator release.
Yeah, exactly.
The kind of thing, especially as we've gotten deep into the catalogs and without going too far, but the stuff that you really haven't heard of or that you've heard mentioned in passing as an extra on another release or something, you go, we'd like to see that film, comes out, and you go, and you get the deep dive at that stage. I would often say I have never been let down. I don't really like Little Murders as a thing, and it's not in this list of the first 50 either. But what a disc! What a disc! It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, there's only a couple. I think I've mentioned Psych 59 before, and maybe things like A Severed Head. But again, the cast brings you back to that as well. And that's the thing for, again, the people who are critical of Indicator. even if it's a film that you say, well, it's a 3-star film, usually there's something in the extras that just make it worth having and worth revisiting.
Yeah, that's what I find interesting about it is in terms of the films that they were releasing, and they definitely are the label that are releasing a certain type of film at this stage. You know, the stuff that didn't really break through, or you'll not see on another release. In fact, I'm pretty sure there hasn't been a crossover of like a Criterion something. Oh no, there is. Sorry, though. Obviously, there's a Big Heat, which was the thumbnail. It was like a Criterion release, but very, very few occasions where they have went for, you know, something that was well known or well touted. Like the bit I always used to think at this stage, you know, in the first 50 was they would release films that had well-known actors or made by well-known filmmakers, but the stuff that you weren't watching and the stuff that wasn't on TV and the stuff that wasn't being shown at any stage, and then presenting that.
I think they've done that really well. So, I mean, I know we're both guilty of jumping on the imprint wagon and maybe cooling off a little bit now, because so many of the releases are now getting releases elsewhere.
That's right.
And that's fair enough, because imprint are naturally an Australian market initially. Whereas, as you say, Indicator haven't really had that overlap with other companies, which I think helps as well. And as you say, it's maybe the bottom half, not necessarily of quality of a director's work, but the ones that are neglected and need kind of reappraised and things like that. Or a film that was maybe ahead of its time for its subject or genre, but wasn't quite successful. So one of the 50s, Fragment of Fear, which is 1970, which is almost a kind of giallo, but not quite. It has kind of elements.
Right,
and obviously Bird with Crystal Plumage is 1970. So you'll have films that are, if they came along a little bit later, would be more appreciated, or kind of missed the boat, but are still interesting enough that you actually go, that was a really decent little film.
Yeah. I've had the comment up for me night as well. Keep hovering over Ghost of Mars and Vampires just for the interviews, but can't quite persuade myself. I've seen this I've seen the start of Ghost of Mars, and
I can't really recommend them that highly. I would probably wait for a sale. I think that would be the best advice.
You get 3 for 15 or something around that stage. I mean, they are very much John Carpenter movies, like both of them. They're both a bit silly and a bit stupid in some ways. I think I'm well known for saying that about Carpenter movies. I kind of like that they're sort of dumb at their heart, like all of them.
Yeah, I mean, certainly Ghost of Mars is not that clever.
I think it's a film of its time as well. Like, it's very much, there was a lot of like genre films like that were getting funded with not much money that kind of had a similar feel, but at least this is a Carpenter feel to it. Like, I think you would know it was a Carpenter film. So, I mean, if you can get it on sale, I think definitely. And
if you're a Jason Statham completist, then
I mean, who isn't?
Exactly.
Warren points out another one that's Criterion as well. Indicator's brilliant release of Devil in the Blue Dress got Criterion's attention so much to Kurt Franklin that they decided to release it in the US. Yeah,
absolutely. That was another one that when it got, because I think I had a German Blu-ray, and when it got an Indicator, I was just like so pleased. It's one of my favorite films in the 90s. So.
Well, it's funny because I remember being released by Indicator and people kind of doing a bit of the scratching of the beard and going, "Oh, that's an interesting title for Indicator to release." And then when it was like get the 4K treatment for Criterion, it's like people reevaluate it due to its prestige and getting released by some of these labels, and can start off small and then grow.
Yeah, whatever happened to Carl Franklin is really interesting, because obviously One False Move, which is another 90s masterwork, and then just lots of kind of TV movies and stuff. It's really interesting because he had two of the best American films of the 90s, in my opinion. So.
But I love those explorations of those kind of filmmakers and those kind of characters in it. I mean, Hammerbox, etc., fall outside this, but they do an awful lot of that introspective into the individuals that we've seen for one movie or something, and bringing those to the fore. Other things in the top 10 that really jump out at you, the first 10?
The first 10.
I feel like we should probably go through them one by one, because they all kind of say something slightly different, I think. It's almost like Body Double's number 2.
Yeah, Body Double, again, perhaps not De Palma's best film, and you could argue maybe casting has something to do with that, but still fascinating enough. And then Happy Birthday to Me, which is it their only kind of
slasher,
slasher?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I have a sad story about Body Double. It's the only standard edition one that I have in my collection.
See, I had about 8 or 9 standards, and I was happy. And then the voice in my head said, "Yeah, but they look different on the shelves." So I ended up spending way too much money on limited editions.
It doesn't bother me, but it bothers me. You can actually see I haven't even taken the wrapper off this one because I actually rented it at the time.
You so much
to see, but yeah, it also sort of fits with the cover. You know, with the fact that he's peeking through the blinds, that I don't take the cellophane off because it feels a bit sleazy and dirty. But there you go.
Yes. And Bunny Lake is missing is a real curiosity, but it's a wonderful little curiosity.
See, I would say actually of the first 10, it's my favorite film out of those. I think, actual film.
Yeah,
and it is it's Preminger, isn't it? Bunny Lake, isn't it? It is.
Yes,
it is.
There's a character in himself.
Yeah. Did Lady from Shanghai be your favorite of the?
Probably seen it in
movie.
Blu-ray, and seeing it again. Another Orson Welles film that was messed about, and it's not.
That's true. Yeah.
But for what it is, and again, the number of times, it's maybe not the first time people used mirrors, but it has been kind of ripped off so many times. The Hall of Mirrors and just the odd characters. And of course, Orson Welles' wonderful accent.
There's always a Wellesism somewhere in his films, you
know. A subtle Irish accent. John Voight wasn't available, so.
I was going to say, I don't think actually in cinema there's such a thing as a subtle Irish accent. It just doesn't. It doesn't exist. It's like a subtle Scottish one. They're not harming people for subtle anything if they're hiring a Scottish person. I don't know. Then we have our lovely duet of Sidney Poitier, may he rest in peace.
Yes,
etc. Again, films that have, I think, since they've been released, have been reappraised many times. Actually, since they've appeared in the first 10 here, Deserve Love, and especially Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, really seem to have taken on a new life.
I'll be honest, that was when I was clearing my indicator backlog. That was one of the last ones I watched. But that final scene that Spencer Tracy's giving a speech and Audrey Hepburn, Catherine Hepburn's looking at him, but she's not actually looking at him as an actor. She's looking at him as his wife because she knew that he was essentially dying. I mean, it's
chilling, isn't it?
Actually thinking about it.
It's one of those incredible cinematic things that those moments that are captured on celluloid, and there's a story behind the story, which is again, to me, is the very essence of extras in the boutique Blu-ray community. Is they kind of pull this out and actually say, you may not know this, or you may not have been aware of this, but this is actually what's going on, and I think it's those times that you kind of go, oh man, I need to know everything about a lot of these films and how they're made. And then of course sorry.
I was just going to say, so I mean, if you watch it back again and don't actually watch Spencer Tracy and just watch Catherine Hepburn, I mean, it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's really something else. And Deserve Love, which is had a 4K release through one of those Columbia Classics big boxes that they've done.
That's a fun little film.
It's a fun little film, but also like slightly ridiculous as well. I don't know if it's just me.
It hasn't aged that well, I don't think.
This idea of this, he's almost like a do-gooder. He's like supposedly a hero saving these young kids from themselves.
I mean, some people criticize Guess Who's Coming to Dinner for maybe being idealistic and of too kind of clean or whatever, but I think that's aged better than To Serve with Love has.
To Serve with Love. Although I don't get me wrong, I think To Serve with Love is great.
Yeah,
and it has Lulu in it, so how bad
exactly.
Can it be? I did actually spend a lot of my time watching that movie, googling a lot of the cast. I think a lot of these people must have done something else. But actually not very many seem to, I suppose.
I mean, you can't get enough of Poitier, so.
Well, that is true.
The more Poitier, the better.
Indeed. And then we've got Happy Birthday to Me, which I actually really enjoyed as well. Not a big slasher fan at the time, but I was like, It's playful in the way the good slashers are. 10 Wellington Place.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I'd never seen it before. And it was, because I'm not the biggest Dickie Attenborough fan, apart from Oh What a Lovely War. Why doesn't that have a Blu-ray, by the way? Yeah, but he's absolutely fantastic in that. And it's genuinely chilling. Because again, in the extras, he does talk about how when he went home after shooting, he had to shower because he felt disgusting playing that character.
It feels like a really dirty film, doesn't it? I think they capture that really well. And nice to see that Solitary Ronin hates Miracle on 34th Street confirmed. There we go.
Yeah, I don't seem to have that one. Don't know why. Or the remake. That's ridiculous.
And I think before we hit the end, we hit our first really underrated, even to this day, I think, even within the catalogue, Fat City. With Stacey Keach. I think is the first really indicator title I think that we get in the collection.
Again, I'm not the biggest John Huston fan, but Fat City is really good. Apart from the alcoholic woman, whose performance is a bit much, but apart from that, it's really good. He captures a real feel. There's a real atmosphere of this kind of side of the side of the pavement, side of the street that we don't really want to be in.
And for me, I had really no awareness of Stacey Keach as an actor. And so through this period when we started to get more and more Stacey Keach, I was like, this guy's really good. And actually in subsequent interviews and stuff he's done, he's a really engaging. He's appeared in a number of extras for Indicator over the years, and kind of like, this guy's...
I mean, we'll get to another Stacey Keach film.
Yes, I'm sure we will.
Is one of my favourite Indicator releases, period.
For sure. We'll round out the top 10 with The Last Detail, which again is another one that seems to be reappraised over the years in terms of Jack Nicholson and Randy Quaid. And
again, I'm not the biggest Jack Nicholson fan, but the titles that are in The Indicator, he's fantastic in all of them.
The one that funny enough, the one that I like least out of it is the one that he's most prominent in, which is The Border. I'm not a massive Border fan.
I have a soft spot for the Border.
Fight
and Harvey Keitel.
Harvey Keitel, indeed.
Obviously, for me, it would probably be The Passenger, even though it's because I'm not a huge Antonioni, even though I've only seen I think 3 or 4 at the moment.
This is ridiculous. What are you saying?
Norte is probably my favourite Antonioni so far.
I'll have to admit, that film, I couldn't understand the hype for it. And then you see the final shot and you go, oh, well. It's not something you see every day, that.
I can't remember what I said in my review, but I think I read it slightly differently. And I think that's why I enjoyed it more. As far as just, again, the disconnectedness of the two. Rather than getting together, I think it's just more taking them apart.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think The Passenger is the most magnificent film, but again, it's the first one I'm looking at the list. It's the one that really jumped out to me as like an art housey type Indicator release. You know, I mean, it is Antonioni, which is totally his bag, but the fact that they would go with that one, because it sort of starts out like a lot of Indicator titles with that kind of two-handed, Maria Schneider and Jack Nicholson playing off each other, and then ends in this kind of other place. So after that, pick us a title.
Well, for me, it is one of those ones that just blew me away because I was completely unaware of it, and it's The New Centurions.
Indeed, with your favorite actor of all time,
my favorite actor of all time, George C. Scott, that I'm not a huge fan of, but I do have a lot of his films, and I love a lot of his films. Because also he's in Hardcore, obviously, which is Indicator, another one which is fantastic. They need more Paul Schrader than Indicator. On a completely different note, when Light Sleeper got a release, that was fantastic.
Oh yeah.
But it's amazing how many Richard Fleischer films you actually like when you think about it, because he's not a director that springs to mind when you say, "What's your favorite director?"
Yeah.
But there's a lot of Richard Fleischer films you end up really liking and you have in your collection. It's almost Hill Street Blues before Hill Street Blues.
It certainly is.
Because it was written by a cop about his experiences. There's no main villain. It's just days in the lives of them.
The villain is the work that they do in some ways, you know. Yeah.
When big events happen, they are shot so well that you don't realize it's happening until it actually happens. It's not the foreshadowing that we get, perhaps nowadays. And George C. Scott, the scene in his house where the camera doesn't really move is just an absolute tour de force.
Oh yeah.
And Stacey Keach, as you mentioned, is just absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. Extremely
believable. So that one just kind of blew me away. How it ends as well. It's just realistic, and it's not really movie cops in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, it's funny. See, when you hit 10 million subscribers and people go through your catalog, I think you'll find that the most used phrase that you've used in all of your videos is, "I'm not the biggest George C. Scott fan, but." And also the first one that you picked. Yeah. What am I going to go for? I'll go for this one because, again, it's a very beloved filmmaker of mine, which would be Housekeeping by Bill Forsyth as well. Again, a bit different for Bill Forsyth. You know, if anybody's seen any of his other stuff like Local Hero or I always get this wrong, Rick Gregory's Girl, George's Girl, which is also in the collection later on. They're very provincial, you know, in their humor and that kind of stuff. And I could sort of see, you know, somebody from Britain thinking hilarious, but somebody maybe not from Britain going, I don't get the humor in this. Where this is quirky, you know, this idea of parenting alternatively done or something, you know, with the aunt is kind of left for the responsibility of these kids, and is kind of a bit weird and wacky, and society judging them for it. And there's a real feeling of you as the person watching it fighting for the characters on screen, if you know what I mean. You want to put yourself in the middle of it and go, look, leave them alone, they're doing okay, and that kind of thing. And then, I mean, the cover, I think, just says a lot about that film. That this kind of things. I always kind of wondered when I was watching the film, how does this? Well, what does the cover mean? And of course, it is revealed, of course, as you go through the movie. But that would be one that I would highlight as something that's very different, or an indicator release in some way.
I think I'd pick that out as well. Is it the Pacific Northwest it's set in?
Well, that is a good question. Well, it has they live in the woods, obviously, with the very the redwoods and stuff around it. So that's probably not a bad call at all.
But it's a kind of wonderful atmosphere and place to be. And like you say, you're on Christine Leighty's side. And it's so well written that the people who are against it aren't like cartoonish or anything. There's still a reality to those characters. You know, sometimes you do have films where the not villains, but the antagonists are so cartoonish that it's not very well balanced. But again, Bill Forsyth, when he's at his best, kind of knows how to kind of balance characters out.
Yeah. Well, how that man isn't more famous, I'll never understand. How he didn't have a longer, more storied career.
He's just so underrated.
It certainly is.
When you consider he made That Sinking Feeling for
that's
right, tenor.
Yeah. So BFI flip side release of That Sinking Feeling, indeed.
Yeah. Well, I'll pick one, Spine number 36, which is truly an indicator release. And that's Otley. Which is essentially, it's 1969, so this is obviously post-Bond, post-Harry Palmer. But this is essentially a spy film with a flat tire, as Tom Courtenay is just this, I'm not sure what you'd call him, not necessarily a buffoon, but just a kind of
rascal
character.
A rascal, you know. He starts off in one woman's bed and then makes his way to another one within the first 5 minutes, you know.
And just gets caught up in this spy story, and it's just absolutely wonderful. It's got Romy Schneider in it, James Villiers, who might be in an every indicator title, Leonard Rossiter, James Bolam, directed by Dick Clement, which might was this the only film he directed? I'm not actually sure. with his famous partner, and it just has a wonderful pep to it and a wonderful energy to it.
Mm-hmm.
It knows what it is. It's playful, but it's odd enough to rest easily in the Indicator canon, and it's just an absolute blast. I'm sure it's still available and you can pick up probably in a sale as well, because again, it's one of those films that nobody would have talked about, a film I'd never heard of before, but it's an absolute joy.
Yeah, it's a bit like I say, the context given around the spy film genre at that time, it's very come on, in Le Frenny, you can feel that through the screen. You can say that there sort of is like a British sitcom-y feel to it, even though it's a feature film of some sort. David has been saying he bought The Passenger on the Border and not seen yet. I mean, I think The Passenger is the better movie there, but my compatriot thinks not. But ain't that the beauty?
Yeah, they're both worth having and seeing.
Indeed. And we've upset some people already. Like, I'm not surprised in any way, shape or form, but there you go.
I don't think it was dissing. It was just saying that the Border is far superior. But then I'm not as intelligent as all you Antonioni fans.
That is true.
That's been well established.
And Carl's arrived just after everybody's been giving him lots and lots of praise. So there you go. You're too late. Oh, well.
Welcome. Welcome. No more praise. That's
it. What could it go for next? I'm going to go for... I always feel weird when you've made a video about a release already. Then you go, God, everybody will have seen that. And then you know that it's only got like 20 views and nobody has seen it. So we'll talk about the 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T.
Oh, yes, that's another one that was just like, what? This is amazing. I can't believe this has got a Blu-ray, and I'm so happy.
Well, it's one of those, I didn't know anything about it, and you look at the cover and go, I don't even know what this is going to be.
Yeah, I remember seeing it on BBC 2 or Channel 4 one afternoon and just being gobsmacked that how did they put this on? How did they get away with this?
Yeah, whose idea was this? Did they think it was a good idea? It's a film I enjoy quite a lot, but then I am the musical theatre fan, I think it's fair to say, of the crowd. So I was probably going to like it anyway, but it has a sort of like whimsical, that's Dr. Zeus kind of story that gets on screen. And if you say Dr. Zeus movies have you seen? You're thinking Cat in the Hat and all of the modern ones, but actually disregarding something like 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T, which is just madcap and lots of fun.
Yeah, because this was the only one he was actually involved with, and after it, he stopped being involved with adaptations. Sadly, it is the kind of cut down version because the rest doesn't exist. But I think there's 5 more songs that were in the film originally. The songs are fantastic, especially the one where the Dr. T's dressing. That one's absolutely fabulous. I mean, there's torture scenes. It's like,
well, that's what I was going to say. It's sort of darker than what I think people would expect, and I think that's possibly like people will talk about the original Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory as being sort of having a very, very dark undertone, but this kind of turns down the light even another little bit in terms of what's supposed to be presented as a happy, jolly musical sing along.
Because obviously, people say if you mention the Holocaust, you've pretty much ended your argument. But the scene where the kids come in and all their glasses and all their whistles are taken off them and put into huge boxes and all their belongings are taken off them before they go into this bizarre, huge keyboard.
What a set.
It does have some kind of dark undertones to it.
Yeah, and the escaping of it. I don't know. It also... And this might be just because I've watched your top 50 movies. Here's the spoiler hint. It has a touch of Flash Gordon about it for me as well. There's something about them getting trapped in that kind of lure. Otherwise, I'm trying to get out that kind of is reminiscent of that. But there's 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T, which I'm sure is on the standard edition now, but great fun.
The extras are fantastic, especially the stuff about the music archive.
And how
they're essentially just binning all this music and just burning it and just getting rid of all this music, and it's just like, it's pretty unbelievable. But
it is why releases like this and kind of archiving and talking about those things is sort of preserving them in its own right, and because the more that people talk about it and are aware of it, the more they'll seek it out and state that it's important, etc. So Yeah.
I mean, it is kind of easy criticism to say it's like a fever dream, but it's kind of like a fever dream.
Well, if you're not thinking Dr. Seuss stuff is a fever dream to start off with, I don't think you're reading it right.
Yeah. He certainly ate too many mushrooms, perhaps. I don't know.
Give us one more.
How about number 37? Cena did number 36. Stephen Frears' Gumshoe with Albert Finney, which again is like Philip Marlowe, but is it Liverpool? I'm sorry, I can't actually remember. That's terrible. Liverpool or Manchester, maybe. So it's not quite glamorous LA, but it works as somebody dreaming about being a private eye. It works actually as a story and a mystery as well. So it works as a, not necessarily a pastiche, but a kind of homage to the private eye films, The Big Sleep and stuff like that. But it also actually works as a story as well. Billy Whitelaw's fantastic in it. Albert Finney's wonderful in it. It's just a really nice little film.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I watched it not that long ago, and I sort of struggle with Albert Finney in general in these kind of like action roles. I think because kind of sort of became for a while, but in here at least he's got some sort of noose, and like the private detective is better than the action roles that he kind of did on the side.
Well, remember he was going to be Lawrence of Arabia, which is almost unfathomable. But fortunately, they changed their mind.
Yeah, more Hercule Poirot and less Lawrence of Arabia, as it turns out.
Yes,
indeed. I'll do one more, and I'm going to go for the Pumpkin Eater.
Yes, that's another one that not necessarily you would go, oh yeah, I've got to buy that, but then when you watch it, it's like, that's fantastic.
That's fantastic, and what really strikes me about it is, and again, because I was only born in the 70s, my history of awards for films before that time is sort of patchy.
Yeah.
So you watch a film like this and you go, how have I not heard of this film before? Like, in particular, Anne Bancroft is incredible in this film. Yeah. And then you go in the extras and it turns out she was actually nominated for the Academy Award for Best Actress for it. So this indicator release actually stands up quite well.
Yeah.
And actually was quite famed. She won Golden Globe for Best Actress. She won Laurel Award. She won the Best Actress at Cannes. This was a very celebrated performance. And again, how is I not aware of this? As a thing. All anybody talks about in Bancroft is a graduate, and that's it. Full stop. That's the end of that lady's career, and yet she's terrific. I think one of the things that always strikes me about these is how relevant an awful lot of them are in today's society as well. And Pumpkin Eater, I think, is a really good example of that, of this woman in this relationship and this partner. I mean, Peter Finch in most things is terrific as well. Yeah. And you've got James Mason, etc., in it as well. But actually, how complex relationships are, and actually what you see in screen and the kind of lives that they go through. I think Pumpkin Eater kind of blew my socks off when I watched it. And went, this is pretty good.
And again, as you say, it's amazing how many really good films with really good performances just get forgotten about. Mm-hmm. Even ones that were award winning. We know certainly that nowadays, that 2 years after a film wins an Oscar, nobody remembers it.
That's it.
But there just seems to be so many films from the 60s and 70s that are wonderful, and were critically acclaimed, but just get forgotten about and slip through the cracks. And fortunately, Indicator are there to pick them up with a big net.
And charge us money for them, and we give them
money,
and
especially
here we are. Especially, I'm sure there was a time when I was looking at the shelves going, I'm really enjoying these Indicator releases, but I'll never have them all.
Yes.
Anyway.
As long as it's just one line that you have them all and not every line, that would be ridiculous.
That some of it's, thankfully, some of it's not even possible to do.
Yes.
We're saved from ourselves.
Yes.
In some way, shape, or form. Any other highlights from other ones, or maybe one that you didn't really connect with? You're not a massive fan of?
Again, as I've said, there's quite a lot that you go in thinking I'm not going to like this, and then you love it. I guess I would say one that kind of is an example of it's an interesting film but doesn't quite work for me, at least, is Mickey 1.
Oh, interesting.
By Arthur Penn, because for me this is Arthur Penn and Warren Beatty trying to go new wave, and it doesn't really work. But again, that's just my opinion. My opinion is not fact, as we all know. So again, there's things to like about it, but it almost feels like they're trying too hard to be French new wave.
Oh yeah,
and I don't think it was successful at the time. And unlike a lot of films, I can kind of see why. It's not that, oh, it's so new wave that it's difficult to digest or anything. For me, it just doesn't really work as an American trying to do new wave. So I would say that's probably one that doesn't quite sit with me. But again, it's an interesting watch as an experiment that perhaps didn't really work.
Yeah. I think for me, that's the Warren Beatty effect for a lot of movies. I think Warren Beatty is often in those types of movies for me. And I often think if there had been a more compelling main actor or something in this, then I might have gravitated. Not to say that Warren Beatty hasn't done good work, but he sometimes his 50% isn't what another person's 50% can be, for me anyway.
What about you? Is there one that doesn't quite?
Well, it's not really doesn't work. It's something that I thought I was going to really like, and I thought it was good, but not what I expected to be. Torture Garden, Amicus. I expect this is sort of a controversial opinion, but I thought this being sort of an anthology Amicus production would have been something that I was really going to rave about. And in fact, it was one of the ones that I had to pay over the odds for at the time, and I think part of that plays in.
Yeah, because that went out of print quite quickly.
It went out of print quite quickly. Yeah, so Amicus would. So I think part of the fact that I did overpay for it.
Cover.
Plays in.
Don't worry, there's not two separate versions. It's fine.
Oh, do you know that used to be an old way of getting these really cheap? You know, somebody would list it with the cover split round. People go, "Oh, that's not the indicator version." You go, "Oh, but it is."
Yeah,
and then you'd get it for £10 rather than whatever it was. But I think that does play into part of my disappointment with this film, because it's a fine anthology kind of horror thing, but just didn't quite reach the heights of the levels that I was maybe hoping that it was going to. And it has just, I mean, great cast the way through. Burgess Meredith and Jack Palance to go inside. Mr. or Sir Peter Cushing, probably a better way to put it.
Yes.
One of the icons of British cinema. But yeah, Torture Garden would have been one of those for sure.
Yeah, I mean, usually there's an anthology film that one of the chapters is a little bit weak, but obviously if you have 2 or 3 out of the 4 that aren't as good, then it doesn't matter how fun the framing device is. And the framing device in that one is fun, but the stories perhaps aren't strongest.
Yeah, it's kind of, the setup isn't executed as well as you might like.
Yeah.
I think we should probably talk about these Harryhausen, or at least one of these Harryhausen / Sinbad sets.
Yes, these are magnificent.
They're like, you're probably much like myself. So if anybody was from outside the UK in this kind of thing, I don't know what this was like in the rest of the world, but Harryhausen Sinbad, for anybody in the UK, was Saturday afternoon, Sunday afternoon, ITV, BBC Two. You know, they were those films, these adventure films that I often think it's funny when you look back at I'm sure the time they were made, they were very expensive, big budget things, and they become this kind of afternoon adventure fair. I think there's loads of films like that. So Imprint did a whole run of them as well, where I was like, oh, this must have been big news at the time, but actually is relegated to sort of, oh, here's entertaining an hour and a half kind of thing. But of course, elevated by Harryhausen's work right the way through them.
That's absolutely astounding.
And sort of makes a mockery of a lot of like special effects these days. You know, some of the animatronic stuff's just, it's way more believable and even way more scary in some ways because of how they animated and they moved.
I mean, obviously they're not there with the actors at the same time, but there is something there physically on the screen, like cast shadows that are real shadows, not CGI shadows, which is almost as bad as CGI fire. Yeah, there's a spirit to those films and a soul to those films, even if it is clay and plastic soul. But there's still a soul to those films that a lot of effects-driven films nowadays just don't really have a soul, because the craftsmanship that went into it. Not that creating CGI isn't a craft,
it's a craft, yeah.
And it was literally him in a shed for days.
Picture.
I mean, yeah. So some people might watch them and take them for granted, but I think if you're a certain age, and as you say, perhaps if you're from the UK, they hold a special place, and they'll always will hold a special place. An Indicator just absolutely knocked out of the park with these sets.
The interesting thing about these films, I think, specifically for me, is, I mean, I wouldn't actually say all of them are great films. Do you know what I mean? They are sort of cut and paste, like adventure scripts that are elevated by some of the work that's in them.
And you could certainly say the quality of Sinbad's is somewhat uneven. But again, how many of us as kids are there for the acting prowess of the Sinbad?
Well, that's exactly it.
We're not necessarily there for the acting chops. But some of them have really good villains, and as we know, a really good villain makes or breaks a film a lot of the time. It's not actually about the hero, it's about the villain.
I mean, I thought you were going to run down Tom Baker there for a minuscule second there. I thought that's where you were going to go, but certainly not. We can breathe. Well, again, Peter would have just burst through the internets.
Tom Baker's absolutely fantastic.
He is, and indeed. I think that's one of the great pleasures I have of watching those things that I didn't appreciate in my childhood, as
look at the cover.
Carl has been said. Oh, that's just brilliant. As said here, is the kind of actors that I knew nothing about at the time, but then when you watch these films back, you go, "Oh, there's in these films." But yes, I think these box sets in particular were very landmark. I definitely got in the habit of taking all the bands off all of mine, and having this unspoiled, lovely artwork.
Do you keep the bands, or have you binned the bands?
Oh yes, no. So the bands are kept, but they kind of sit on the top of my releases on the shelves, and the little gap in between them and the bit above. So they're all kind of like stacked neatly in there if ever I need them. But it's also a good way to remind yourself of, yes, I've finished watching all of these films in this set. The band stays off, it gets shown on the shelf, and away you go.
Yeah, it's strange because obviously the covers look better without the bands, but I've still never got to that stage of removing the band. It's maybe like stabilizers in a bike. I don't know.
But the bands have the numbers.
Yeah, exactly.
So
you've got you over a barrel.
It's literally the only thing that's unique about the release. So how do you throw away the band when it's the one thing that's, I don't know. It's like you're throwing money away. Indeed.
Yeah.
But I think the build quality of the boxes, it's something, because again, I think they changed the game for this a little bit. I think lots of people were doing boxes and they're like, God, collections of films are great, but there's a thickness to these boxes. Like if I take the things out, I have had this for a number of years. This is as solid as the day that it came in through my door, because it's really thick cardboard rather than kind of something that's maybe falling apart. I'm trying to think. Oh yes, something like the Artificial Eye box sets that I would have for like Charlie Chaplin or Truffaut or something, where the cardboard's thin, and those things do not age well.
No,
these are made to be collector's items, and I think there's definitely a part of the collecting part that kind of gives you that brand loyalty when you see this is a collector's item, not just a great film or otherwise. And for better or for worse, that played an awful lot of part in me starting to collect these month on month and kind of relishing and waiting on the package coming to the door, and then going through and making my way through the theme of the month that was those releases. Yeah,
they certainly don't, for want of a better phrase, half-arse things that certain companies are famous for almost. And again, for me, because they are a small company run by a small number of people, that's why I always do it through the website rather than through other sites. So you're actually supporting them. And again, as I've said before, some people might say, well, they don't do great films or famous films, but they are, for me, obviously, worth supporting. An element of that is because they're a small company. So,
and because I want to see more of these films that I haven't seen. I mean, there is a certain argument to me that says I've probably seen 2001: A Space Odyssey enough times to last me the rest of my life. I mean, I could also argue that I could watch that film endlessly as well, but seeing new types of films and new filmmakers or even deeper cuts of somebody's catalog is something that I'll always kind of gravitate towards, I think.
Yeah, I mean, especially as they've kind of thrown in a couple of surprises later on in the catalogue, which we'll maybe get to in another episode if we don't get cancelled. If the ratings are too low.
Oh, yes,
so
they have to be careful.
They have kind of put out feelers and kind of thrown in a few surprises. So
yeah, because it was obviously interesting. It's one of the things I probably should have said earlier on, that when a new label comes on board, what they're really bringing is a tie to a film studio that hasn't been explored yet. And I think as this moved on, then on to probably what we'll cover next will be box sets or something like that. You know, you'll see that the Hammer relationship with Columbia and actually circumventing what was established UK rights, which was not with Hammer themselves, but actually going through the US releases and prints of those films, meant that we got these beautiful Hammer collections at the far end, which is always very exciting to talk about.
Well, we mentioned number 46, which lay dormant and empty for
I didn't even take it off the shelf, but you can certainly talk about 46, which was one thing and became another.
Yes, I think, was that the Altman film that California split? Was that always 46? Or was it something else?
I thought Ishtar was 46, but you could be right. It was definitely was California split or Ishtar, which was then replaced by, because I didn't even take it off the shelf.
That's Warren Beatty again for Ishtar not been allowed to be released. Yes, The Swimmer, directed by Frank Perry, who did Diary of a Mad Housewife. To be honest, I do prefer The Swimmer. Obviously, I did a random review of it. Just a strange film from 1968 with the wonderful Burt Lancaster. But again, it was always, what's going to fill 46? What's going to fill 46? So it is something special they ended up filling it with. Certainly a film that can be taken many ways about what it's about, and but it's a fascinating film, whether you like it or not, and it's well worth an indicator film.
Yeah, I always thought they were doing us favors by not ever really putting any effort into releasing these in any kind of order, because like even Birdie came out much later, which is about 29 or something like that. It sat as a gap, driving me insane for the longest time of going, what the hell? I nearly didn't buy Birdie because I was like, no, I mean, you've kept me waiting this long. I'm not playing your games.
I saw your Facebook entries on the US releases as far as what are the spine numbers going to be.
That's right, indeed. That is true. Which again is its own thing. They have that that bit, and you're concerned about when they do 4Ks and Blu-ray releases. Does that mean you have to get both to be spine number complete?
Yeah, I still don't know.
Well, I'll give you a clue. They have U and B at the end of the spine numbers. Just
all right, okay. I think you're fine. The 4K. So.
Oh, there you go. Me too. So that's us for the first 50. Any other ones you really want to jump out at, other than saying The Big Heat is fabulous?
Yes, I suppose we should actually talk about the thumbnail that made some people violently ill. Big Heat is absolutely fantastic. Obviously, Fritz Lang, his use of the frame and objects to tell the story. And it's got Lee Marvin. What else do you need to recommend it apart from Lee Marvin?
And the greatest scene with coffee in cinema history.
Yes. Fairly brutal.
Brutal indeed. Actually, probably my favorite Gloria Graham performance, actually, Big Heat. I think she is wonderful in it. And
all joking aside, her story is pretty interesting. to say the least. If you want to
utterly fascinating for sure.
Google Gloria Graham. I know the Nicholas Ray family certainly did.
Well, that's why probably I didn't want to mention in Lonely Places being,
yes.
a thing. It might stir up some bad memories or otherwise.
And another one, just for personal reasons, the Anderson tapes, number 12. I think this was one of the early ones I bought as well. Because obviously I'm a huge Christopher Walken fan, and this is just obviously one of his early performances, and already had his trademark unique line readings, shall we say. But again, another Sean Connery performance where he plays a bit of a git and plays his more physical, animalistic side rather than the suave Mr. Bond. Because again, I've obviously done a video on Sean Connery, and if you take away all his Bond stuff, he did make a lot of interesting, challenging films.
He did. I think the Anderson tapes is, when I watched it, I remember thinking this is a caper. This is one of these films that I put in that category of a caper.
But it is actually quite nasty and quite kind of makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable as well.
Yeah, well, again, it's that thing of Connery just not being suave all the time. There was an edge to him in this film, and of course, it's a Lumet film as well, which doesn't hurt,
No.
If I have to pick one more, let's go for Eyes of Laura Mars, which is brilliant, or do I go for Mia Farrow's Seen No Evil?
Strange enough, 2 films that went out of print really quickly.
Yeah.
Again, another odd kind of films that go out of print really quickly.
Another Richard Fleischer film.
Exactly. See what I mean?
Be sure. It's only when you look sometimes and you go, oh yes, indeed, pretty much exactly the same. But Mia Farrow, the blind girl who's trying to work out, well, what do you say about the film? But she's trying to solve a crime, let's say, by being under threat herself. It's a very effectively done kind of thriller.
Yes. And a nice double bill with Audrey Hepburn's, which I can't remember the title of. Not Fear of the Dark.
I can't think at all. While you're thinking of that, I'll read this comment.
Yeah.
If Indicator could get the Kevin Connor fantasy adventure movies in a box set, that would have my money. I have vivid memories of seeing it there at school at the local ABC. I think, if Indicator got those kind of films, and I'd much rather Indicator got those films and did a release than say something like Arrow or Eureka, because I think they tell more of the story around the cohesive nature of those films, indeed.
Yeah, and Warlords of Atlantis, and I know The Land That Time Forgot's obviously in Blu-ray in the States, but a nice box set of The People That Time Forgot, Land That Time Forgot, Warlords of Atlantis, the Doug McClure luxury box set. That's what we all need.
I think I definitely could see it sitting on my shelf with the lovely Indicator coloring on the spines. That's for sure. We live in hope, and I think they're the kind of company that would see something like this and go, actually, there's something we should probably keep an eye out, going in the future.
Yeah, you can see the woman being smothered by the octopus in the front cover of the box set.
That's true.
That's an image I see often, but maybe I've just got a problem.
And in the blue, it's the first time watching The Swimmer a few months ago. Loved it. Felt way ahead of its time.
Yeah, it has a real European feel to it, but in a successful way.
Yeah.
It works.
Terrific. Well, there's our first episode of Talking About Indicator. Just about done. There's even people still watching. I mean, you crazy people. But I thought we would have 5 minutes. Anybody would reflect on would have been gone, but I really appreciate everybody stopping by. And I think thanks so. Next time we're going to do it, I think we're going to look at the box sets primarily.
Yes.
Hardcover releases, the box sets. Talk about our favorites in there. Some of them are obvious. I think some of them less obvious. And I think for me, it's where Indicator have actually taken a lot of the risks in terms of
certainly
stuff
ones
that they put out.
Yeah, there's certainly ones we can think of that are quite risky, but
something may work for me, may not. I live to discover that next time. If you need to catch Solitary Ronin, you can tell people where to find you.
Solitary Ronin Films, and there'll be lots of rambling nonsense. I'm continuing with my Joseph Losey season, still got a bunch to do, and then hopefully I will get to the other director seasons. I know I've been talking about Kurosawa after Mifune for the last 3 years. But I will get to that, and I'm hoping to do a Mike Hodges, Atamagoyan, and maybe even a Fassbinder, because I need to get through those Arrow sets, and that's maybe the only way of getting through them. So I might do a Fassbinder at some point.
Well, you might see if we do some with Fassbinder. I have a large soft spot for Mr. Fassbinder.
The one that I have watched, Lola, was absolutely amazing. So.
Yeah, incredible film indeed. So everybody, thank you very much for watching. You can stick around. Don't know exactly when we'll do the next one. What might be this time next week. We'll have to see when both of us can fit it into our busy schedules.
Yes, and, absolutely.
I'll have to think of a suitable thumbnail. That
yes, from the next. Yeah, you've got box sets to choose from. There's plenty.
Box sets. Okay. And anybody any ideas? Stick them down in the comments, and we'll see how much fun we can have with those.
Yes.
All right. Catch you soon, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Bye.
All the best.
Bye.
Bye.